Welcome to And Ninthly,
an Inside Number 9 podcast.
with your host, me, David.
And me, John.
Hello, John.
Hello, David.
So, back to talk about the third episode of the 7th series of Inside Number 9. This is 9 Lives Cat. What did you make of this instalment?
First of all, I feel like I should say hello, David. Again, for some reason I had a slightly weird, patronising, dismissive tone.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact we're just glossing over the fact that I burned you to death at the end of last episode as well. That got better.
There's nothing that doesn't get better in a couple of weeks. Give it a couple of weeks. That's what my gran used to say. Anyway, 9 Lives Cat. So where do we start with 9 Lives Cat? I guess we start with the idea of a detective narrative, a slightly generic, cliched detective narrative as it begins, and we're aware of, but become increasingly aware that this is part of the point, as it suddenly reveals that spoilers, everybody, suddenly reveals that the Steve Pemberton character is not what he appears. He's, again, it's that very Inside Number 9 thing of a setup that kind of implies a certain type of character, but then goes, oh, well, no, we never told you. We never told you, actually, that he's a detective, which is a neat little trick. So it turns out that he's actually the writer, and then it turns out that he's actually not the writer. He's actually also a character. So we're in slightly Inception territory here, aren't we? With where's the top layer of reality and where are the two bottom layers of reality?
The bottom drawers, you might say. You certainly end up in slightly Inception territory by the end, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Kind of wondering what's real and what's a fiction and what's a figment of everyone's imagination. There's a I've just rewatched it, actually, so I've just done the second rewatch, the second watch of this. There's a nice line towards the end where the Siobhan Redmond character actually says, "Oh, and then it all got a bit Stephen King." Hack horror novelist haunted by his own characters, which is actually a really nice touch, because it kind of acknowledges the almost slightly cliched element of that as well. It's almost cliche upon a cliche upon a cliche, which I guess maybe makes it less cliched. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, there's actually a Stephen King story that was made into a movie in the early 90s called The Dark Half, which isn't quite that, but it's I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I do, actually. I remember reading that when I was a teenager. And
yeah, so you remember that. It's not quite this, but it's that he's haunted by his own pseudonym, basically.
Yeah, exactly. There's an element there as well of I think it's Luna Park, the Bret Easton Ellis novel, where he's kind of terrorised by fictional characters, basically. I think he is... is he even terrorised by Patrick Bateman? Is Patrick Bateman after him in Luna Park?
I don't know if that's Luna Park, but I remember that does crop up later in his work, yeah.
It's certainly Luna Park is basically about a character called Bret Easton Ellis who's kind of being hunted by his characters. The other things it kind of made me think of, there's a Paul Auster novel as well, part of the New York trilogy, City of Glass, where it's kind of a detective story, but it starts with some writer basically getting a phone call and the person on the other end of the phone asking to speak to Paul Auster, which he isn't, and he then goes off and pretends to be a private detective. Slightly different, but we're in that kind of postmodern territory of, authors and characters kind of bleeding into one, and, characters coming alive and that kind of postmodernism stuff, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree, and those are great literary shouts. There was a couple of more recent televisual ones that came to mind for me, and actually So I'll just straight away say Stephen Moffat, right? Because one of the I remember mentioning this to you, John, when we talked about this a couple of weeks ago now, because the episode was on a couple of weeks ago. So there's again, spoilers for Doctor Who, and including some quite good Doctor Who. There's an episode of the Capaldi era where the 12th Doctor is investigating some sort of sinister stuff, and then he gradually finds out that he is a simulation. That basically, so it turns out some aliens are running for nefarious purposes to sort of see how the Doctor would react in various situations, and him and everyone else in that world that he considers real are not real, and it's about what the Doctor does in that situation. There's another one, an earlier one that Stephen Moffat wrote in the Russell T Davies era, which stylistically contributes some stuff to this episode. I think it does anyway. I don't know how much. I think Shearsmith's a Doctor Who fan. I'm not sure how much Pemberton is. Although Pemberton, actually, I'd only just realised this. The episode I'm talking about, Pemberton is in. He's a guest star in it. So Catherine Tate in Silence in the Library. If you go back to 2008, Catherine Tate gets stuck in this sort of like library computer simulation thing, and she actually is gifted for some reason a sort of simulated family, husband and 2 kids. And as that program starts to degrade and she starts to realise more and more that she's in the simulation, and you get glitches in it and bits that jumps in time and things like that, they play around with the fact that her kids don't have faces. Visually, they actually do that to show the gaps in the simulation there, and its limits. Whereas here it's very much the author's limits or the limits of his effort. So those both factored in for me.
So there was also this other episode I saw that recommended. There's a bit where it's got Mackenzie Crook in it, and he turns into a scarecrow, and Pemberton's in that as well, actually. And yeah,
right. I see what you did there. It's all part of one world. It's all part of one big experience.
It's all part of one world, and we're all in a simulation anyway. So.
Yeah, we certainly are in this podcast permanently.
We are all in a simulation. I just as a side note, actually, I've actually just finished watching Avenue 5, which I've only just got round to, the Armando Iannucci space comedy. There's actually a really nice moment in that where one of the characters, spoilers by the way, where one of the characters is like, yeah, but we're all in a simulation anyway, and nothing really matters, and what's really real anyway, and then so like several people then get in an airlock and just instantly are desiccated by being crushed by the forces of the universe. It's a very nice moment. I thoroughly enjoyed Avenue 5. I finally got round to it, and at the right time, I think.
There's the gag in that's kind of riffing on all this stuff, but kind of the opposite of it. And before all of this stuff in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think it's in Restaurant at the End of the Universe, the book, where some villain is putting Zaphod Beeblebrox in I think it's called the Total Perspective Vortex, which is meant to give him a sense of how cosmically meaningless and crushingly insignificant he is in the universe. But it's in a simulation. It turns out later to be in a simulation that's tailored to Zaphod Beeblebrox, so all it does is massively confirm his own ego and his opinion of himself. So he's the only person to ever survive it, because he's Zaphod Beeblebrox. I should say this is an interesting. We both rewatched this once now. This is one of the ones of this series, and I think there's more than one that are really interesting to watch and rewatch, aren't they? Because at least on even just on the sort of dialogue level, where there's just fun things that particularly Pemberton's author character says, where when you know where it's headed, you can be like, well, that sounds like he's being a police inspector in the moment, doesn't it? And then you actually know he's talking about this. One of the early ones I caught was where him and the cat character are both standing in front of the notice board for the first time, and she says, there's a lot of gaps here or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I'm still in the process of fleshing out the characters. When it seems as though they're talking about a crime scene. That's a fun one.
Yeah. Again, I mean, I'm sure we've talked about this before. It's something that Inside Number 9. It's kind of its MO, really, isn't it? Is to do something that has a paradigm shift towards the end, so that you can watch it again and it's a completely different story because you're watching it with. It's almost like it's the opposite of dramatic irony. It's it's withholding crucial information from the audience, so that when it comes to seeing it the second time, you then have that information. So it's the opposite of Greek tragedy in many ways, because we don't really know what's going on at all, and it's not revealed to us until the end. And this is definitely one of those examples. And as I said earlier, I think that's the thing that they do very well, is they very heavily they use all of their techniques and all of their writing skills and direction and all of these things to imply very heavily that things that we know where we are, or we know who certain characters are, and then rug pull, basically. So this definitely falls into that category of, hey, we never said she was real, we never said he was a policeman, therefore, we don't feel tricked so much as let in on the secret that was there right from the off, I guess.
When you put it that way, they never said, it makes me think of Simon Says, ironically, the game. We never said that. You just assumed that. You just went along with it, like the game. But actually, the episode Simon Says, as in the Series 6 episode about a creator and his universe.
Yes,
a fan of this universe. Yeah. This feels like it's a slightly differently oblique take on some of that, isn't it? It's about a in a more metafictional way. This time, it's about a creator's universe taking on a life of its own. And even actually, I was thinking later in the episode when Kat sort of manifests in what we think then is Pemberton's real world, she talks about kind of wanting this sort of story finished in a certain way, and there you go back to King as well, like with Misery and things like this, like the kind of, in a sense, the fan of the world, or in this case it's the star wanting their own agency. It's like if Misery was about the actual character Misery wanting the book written that way, you could, rather than a super fan. So but it's interesting just get the sense that Pemberton plays the kind of author in both of them. He's kind of, and he's sort of irritated, doesn't think it's possible at first, and then is irritated and scared by power being wrested away from him in that format.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we're getting into kind of Charlie Kaufman territory as well, really, aren't we?
It's an interesting nod, yeah.
It's adaptation particularly, where he's putting himself into the story and he's having conversations with himself, but at the same time he's got real life characters from this novel that he's trying to adapt. There's elements of being John Malkovich that you've just reminded me of there with that as well. So there is a kind of Kaufman-esque postmodern. I hate calling it postmodern, but what else could you say?
Well, I've got another cinematic parallel, which is more popular cinema, I suppose. Toy Story, right? You've got the characters who, particularly Buzz Lightyear, you might say, in that first one. The toys, people being these figures who are being manipulated by author figures and may not realise that they're in that's what they are. I mean, actually, the trauma of that is like a big part of Toy Story, isn't it? The first one,
Yeah, of finding out who they really are and what they really are, I guess, as well. Yeah,
and working out whether they're okay with that or not. What they can do within that. I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess we're getting into themes of kind of being and consciousness and the hard problem and things that everyone human struggles with, of finding their place in the world and having perspective and
yeah, all that big stuff.
All that big stuff. Truman Show is like having mentioned kind of an author who is kind of manipulating a being. I guess that's Truman as well.
It's interesting you started off when we talk about this episode by saying, they're sort of piling on these writing cliches and, detective fiction writing cliches at the very start. It was really fun for me watching this one because I think it was just a couple of nights before it was on. I'd been to a sort of crime fiction sort of seminar thing with several authors talking about, crime novels and their crime fictional universes and choices they make in writing them. I went to this Manchester thing. It's organised by the author Rob Parker, actually, if you're listening, Rob. Really enjoyed that, but it was really interesting to come straight to this and a few nights later and be like, this is playing around with all these. And I think as a result, I maybe caught the kind of vague thing, because people know this is not a boast. I'm terrible at finding like learning twists and thinking ahead in that sense. I never do, but in this, not something about the cliches mixed with the way they introduce the Pemberton character by that sort of glide where they reveal a character that tends to suggest that they've kind of materialized, or there's something less than substantial to them. That kind of tipped me off a little bit. One thing I thought was interesting, we'll get back to that cliche thing in a bit. One thing I thought was interesting, I sort of paid more attention to the stages things happen in this episode a bit more than usual here, because just a little bit less than halfway through they start the conversation where it really reveals to Kat what she is, where Pemberton actually sort of lays it out to her. And I thought it was interesting the way that a lot of that conversation, because it goes on for a few minutes, kind of with various stages of revelation, it's sort of phrased a bit like a breakup, isn't it? Like, the sort of vibe is very much of a breakup. Like, there's actually one line I noted down where he actually says, I just really don't think it's working,
Yeah.
That was an interesting mood for it to have, wasn't it? Like you're sort of telling someone, as in any breakup really, for a serious relationship, you're sort of telling someone that they just fundamentally are not enough for you or not right for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's that strange thing again, isn't it? Of authors having control over their characters and how they feel about their characters. It's I think it's maybe Ibsen when he's writing The Doll's House, and he talks about how he lives with these characters. He lives and he breathes and he eats them, and he has to live with them in order for them to to come alive and to do what he wants them to do. So in many ways, if one of those characters isn't working and you do have to abandon them, it is a breakup. But the breakup isn't we'll go our separate ways. The breakup is, I'm going to stop you from existing. So I think there is a very interesting idea there that I don't know that I've necessarily seen that before. This idea of I will just stop writing you and you will cease to exist. But of course they're not a conscious entity. So we're viewing this, we're being given this entertainment as it is to with the idea that this is a conscious entity who feels and has emotion and is phenomenally well acted by Sophie Okonedo. So, we can't help but side with the character rather than the author. But then, we get the same twist again, as it were. And it's strange because obviously that shifts our sympathy almost, because our sympathy is with Kat. Very, very strongly all the way through. Our sympathy is the way that it's written, the way that it's acted and shot. It's, our sympathy is with her. She is our protagonist, essentially. And then the rug pull comes and we realise that she's not our protagonist. Then when the rug pull comes and he is revealed to be a character, actually, we're almost set up to be glad. We're set up to kind of despise him. He's the smug version. He's the smug, horrible version, and it's almost like he gets his comeuppance. So then you get another layer on top of that, which is where Siobhan Redmond is writing a I don't know, self-serving, smug character. Yet she herself is absolutely all of those things as well. She then has to become more smug. She then has to become more clinical. She then has to become more inhumane. She seems to be, but it's obviously we can't use the phrase inhumane because we're not actually talking about humans.
And of course, without even doing another twist, which I'm not saying the episode would benefit from, that quote unquote, really above her are Shearsmith and Pemberton.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, yeah. I guess that's what I don't know. What do you do with that? Where do you stop? And then
I'm glad they stopped there. I think.
actually, David and I can now reveal that in fact we've been writing all of Shearsmith and Pemberton's work for years now. They don't actually exist. It's actually a couple of obscure guys who never wanted that kind of attention.
And actually, we're both written by one of John's cats, which makes a lot of sense, actually, in retrospect.
No, that's not true. That's ludicrous, David. We're all written by one of my cats.
Yeah, sorry, I'd forgotten about that. That meeting's next week. So I had one thing about that. We were talking about the dynamic between Pemberton, the creator, and the character of Kat. There's a sort of tension there that's partly a gender tension. She's clearly based on some tropes of, the kind of detective shows that Pemberton and Shearsmith would have been watching when they were younger men. I think he actually says he'd been watching a bunch of Prime Suspect and Cracker, thought he could do well at it. Obviously Prime Suspect was, Cracker has some interesting female characters and opinions on female characters, but Prime Suspect is, female-centric. And there's a lot of, written characters like Val McDermid characters, etc., from that sort of period that this draws on as well. It's interesting when the revelation happens about her fictionhood, I guess. She describes him as a patriarchal creator. And I thought one of the better lines in it was when he's talking about her limitations of cliche. And he says, "We've seen it all before." And she says, "And whose fault is that?"
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, and there's no comeback for that. And again, it's the weird wormhole that we've gone down there, where he's using that as an example of killing her off, and yet he's responsible for that death, and he's responsible for the reasons that it doesn't work in so many ways. But yet he is still the patriarchal figure who's gonna keep churning out these novels and keep being successful, etc. There was funnily when he mentioned Cracker and Prime Suspect, and then Siobhan Redmond turned up, I'm like, oh, I'm sure Siobhan Redmond was in one of those, and it's not Cracker. She was actually in Taggart for quite a while, or not quite a while. She was in Taggart for several episodes, I think, as a recurring character. So there's that.
That's a nice nod, isn't it? And you know, they've obviously had they've played around with detective stuff before, haven't they? I was thinking, what was the episode? Is it series 6? Hurry Up and Wait, wasn't it? The one where they're doing sort of the present at the filming of a drama, based on a real life disappearance.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the Shearsmith character as well. I mean, that's very Monk, isn't it? Like, writ large, it's, he's the... And I do really I liked the lines about, who has some unspecified mental disorder, and then he just runs out of the room waving his hands going, stop shouting, stop shouting, stop shouting, which I thought was a really very, very nice touch.
Because I think she's thrown the Rain Man, he calls her a bit generic, that other character calls her a bit generic, and she says, fuck off Rain Man, earlier in the episode, and then he's very much doing that a few minutes later, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, that became a big thing in the 2010s, particularly, didn't it? That sort of, I'm sure people are always criticising it in more sort of niche spheres and stuff, but I think Sherlock was a big example. You mentioned Monk, the Bridge, things like that. The people who, I mean, some of those are more specific about their characters' neurodivergence than others, I should say. Some still fall into the trap of using that sort of thing as a superpower. I think Sherlock goes pretty close to that.
Yeah.
We don't have time to do a critique of Sherlock on any level, but there's a few things going on there. I thought it was interesting that there's some other jokes about maybe turned back on Pemberton and Shearsmith's own proclivities and sort of comfort zones, I suppose. I was thinking the scene towards the end of the episode when Pemberton is trying to get his own book written, and he's writing, with Shearsmith's character sort of hovering over his shoulder, and you see that he's trying to engineer a plot just so that he can make a pun about chess. He's sort of working backwards from the pun almost, like he wants to crowbar the pun into it. So he's specifying the plot to that, and I wonder if that's sometimes almost like a slightly deprecating look at what an Inside Number 9 is sometimes like.
Yeah, perhaps it's. I imagine it's the kind of thing they would do to amuse themselves, and we've talked about this before about our interest in the writing process and how the ending is often crucial and a massive change in how you view the story, and in what sense do you start with the twist and work backwards, and how much is that the case, and also how much they clearly love puns, as we've seen in many episodes. There's another lovely line as well when the cat jumps out and Pemberton says, we can do better than that, can't we, resorting to jump scares from a cat, which is again, I think is we don't really know what's going on with the character at that stage, so it almost feels like a bit of a wink to the audience, but obviously it has a different level to it.
I was talking to, on our recent episode about Skeleton Crew by Stephen King, I was talking to Kit Power about jump scares, and we mentioned Alien. We didn't really go into it, but I basically in a throwaway way, I said there are at least 5 or 6 classic jump scares in Alien, and there are also 2 arguably quite cheap jump scares using a cat. So that's a route for some of that, isn't it? That and go back to Val Luton and stuff, I suppose. I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention this, but I had down in my notes the League of Gentlemen movie.
Ah, okay.
Did you ever see that?
Do you know, I didn't.
Interesting. Right, well, this isn't really spoiling much because this is revealed in the first scene of that, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That features the Royston Vasey characters becoming reified and meeting Gatiss, Pemberton and Shearsmith.
Ah, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so they escape from that into a sort of real world. And then I think, actually, in terms of layering, Inception-esque layering, I think there's like another fictional world that then they go into as well, that where none of them belong, so to speak. And that's I haven't seen that in a long time. I seem to remember it being like a kind of deeply flawed but kind of interesting movie. Probably one of the weirder movies I've seen at the cinema, actually, come to think of it, really.
Movie-wise, there was a lovely moment, and I'm sure it's not just me, and I'm sure I'm not reaching too far for this, but when Shearsmith's popping up behind Pemberton and they're talking about getting Jude Law involved, and he just pops up and he goes, Matt Damon, and he's like, shh. And the second time he goes, Matt Damon. And I'm certain that's not coincidence to, Matt Damon in Team America.
That's a little nod there, you think?
Yeah, I think it must be.
Yeah, I like just that speaks of sort of television experience as well, doesn't it? Just like, we're not going to get Matt Damon, Jude Law at a push.
Maybe. But we might get Jude Law, and what does that tell you about, where their careers have gone since The Talented Mr. Ripley? One of them became Jason Bourne, and I don't even know what Jude Law is doing now. No criticism of Jude Law, but I don't know what he's up to.
Yeah, I need to check in with him.
Check in with Jude.
Every hour of the day.
Do you know what his problem is, David? He's become a bit obscure.
Oh, there you go. That's and that's a firing offence. There was one thing, one nice touch towards the end when you see. It's actually the bit when is it Matilda, the sort of ultimate author, so to speak. She's talking to him about. I think she before she says said in Stephen King, she says she thought she was writing a postmodern Prometheus. Which is a nice line. I don't know if that's theirs or, but I'd never heard that before. But that's quite a nice joke, obviously referencing Frankenstein. I like the touch of, he looks at his biography, his like blurb on the back of the dust jacket of his book, and it's that, what do you call it, Ipsus Latin?
It's Lorem Ipsum Dolor. Yeah. As I think I messaged you, best Lorem Ipsum Dolor joke ever. It's the stand-in text you use whenever you're doing copy for something, or whether you're doing design. It's these Latin phrases that kind of use all the characters, upper and lowercase, that you kind of need to be able to. It's placeholder text. Yeah,
and of course, most amusingly, turns up whenever it's used without editing on a Tory election leaflet. That seems to be when I most often see it on Twitter. It's just when someone leaves it in until it goes to the printer.
Yeah,
but that was a really nice joke. I think, in that scene, or near that scene, that she references, the need for a twist, for another twist. Do you think? So this might come back, and I probably if we delve back into older Inside Number 9, we could sort of have this debate about a few different episodes. I'm just going to briefly treat this in this. It might come up again. Do you think that the layers of twists there, that the needing another twist is? I'm not going to say too much because it's not like Gonzo or anything. It's not like it doesn't completely like overwhelm the episode, I think. But do you think there's maybe an aspect where Shearsmith and Pemberton, sometimes rather than searching for another twist, they could just more fully explore the one they've got? They obviously could.
I think we're 7 seasons in, and I think that's a bit of an academic argument, to be honest, because they've done both, and they've and more, and they've had episodes without twists at all, just to prove that they could do that as well. So I think. I agree with you. For this episode specifically, talking about Nine Lives Cat, it was a bit much for me, for it to have that extra layer. But that was the story. Well, was it the story they were telling? I'm not sure. I feel like the story they were telling. I feel like the idea they had was, what if a character within a novel came to life, and it was about the interaction with the author, and actually. And actually, they decided that they wanted to kill them off. Now, actually, they really only needed another 10 minutes of material, and that's his story. Like, they only needed another 10-minute section of that narrative, and Cat dying at the end, or Cat being put in the drawer at the end, is the end of the story. But they obviously either didn't have any interest in doing that, or didn't have a strong enough 10 minutes to go in, or at some point got the idea of going, oh yeah, but hang on, what if the author was also the author? Or did they start with the idea of of an author being an author within an author figment of author's imagination. You just don't know. So for me, it was a little bit too much.
I think I like it because, when I said before that it sort of gives you that chain so you don't know where it ends. You can't see the top of the tower, so to speak. And I like that does, I was sort of joking before, but I like that does include Pemberton and Shearsmith atop the tower. So it's kind of, it's an interesting chain. And I think it's interesting for that reason. One thing I was thinking about it was, because I was thinking, I mentioned Misery before, but like, one thing where authors have played with this is the sort of Arthur Conan Doyle thing. I mentioned Sherlock before, of Arthur Conan Doyle like famously becoming quite resentful of Sherlock Holmes and having to write Sherlock Holmes stories, killing him off and then having to resurrect him. I like that this isn't quite that. This is more about the personal relationship, because Kat isn't a popular character, she's not even a published character. No one else really cares about her. This is all important to him, right? She's been in the bottom drawer of his mind, of his room and his mind. This is it's about that more personal relationship between an author and work they're not known for, but work that they're trying to make work.
Yeah, I guess so. There's that nice little moment as well about her saying, "I want a proper paperback and a proper hardback on shelves, not self-published on Kindle." I think that was, like a telling remark about the industry itself and how that's changed as well, I think.
Yeah, what's considered sort of, old school legit success as opposed to sort of, borderline vanity project, or, at least more, DIY stuff.
Yeah. I suppose there's a moment there as well to bring in Jeremy Dyson as well, who has, gone on to become an incredibly successful writer and writes a lot of very good short stories particularly. Whereas I don't think any of the other three have. I don't think any of the other three have had a published writing career, particularly. I'd say the other three, League of Gentlemen, obviously, I don't think have gone on to publish anything particularly.
Yeah, and he's sort of carved out that niche for himself. As he's done, theatre writing and stuff as well. Ghost stories. That was him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He authored. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Actually, one thing before we might be ready to move on, but the Simon Says has another link where the Pemberton author character makes a sort of disparaging remark to sort of dystopian fantasy stuff.
Oh, yes, yeah.
He just says there's way too much of that, basically. Or, makes a disdainful comment about the idea of having to write.
He says, streaming services all want female-led content or various dystopian wastelands or something. But far more pejoratively, I think.
Did you stick around to the end credits of this one? Did you watch the whole end credits?
No, I don't think I did. Is there something at the end?
Yeah. There's yeah.
There's bollocks.
Yeah.
Damn you, BBC. You were already moving me on to the next episode.
Right, well, I'll leave that for both John and for our listeners who may have seen it, but it's what to say about it without spoiling it. It's not really something they've ever done before, and it's maybe something you should watch with the lights off, I guess.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break in a second, right?
Yeah, why not? Lights cut out instantly.
Yeah, well, let's come back after the break, because I've literally just watched the episode, so I will just go back 35 seconds and watch the credits.
Oh, there you go. Okay, break.
But with the lights out, right?
Obviously.
How will I find my remote control? Cheap shot, guys. I mean, that's
your considered verdict. Having come back from the break.
That's the equivalent of that's the equivalent of the cat jump.
Yeah, well, it's not even a jump, is it? It's just like ooh, it's a slight jump scare, I suppose. It's like something from a Conjuring movie or something, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. And obviously they've got the spooky child singing a nursery rhyme. It's a bit 2010s horror, isn't it? Oh no, it's fine. It's fun. It's fun, and I guess there is a layer there. Well, I don't know if we're reading too much into that. Is there a layer there of saying, yeah, but the child's alive too, the faceless child, and what happens to them, and what universe do they exist in? What part of these layers of reality do they exist in? And
oh yeah, so like there's things worse than being cat, right? You could be one of those creations.
Yeah, there's worse than being cat.
Creations.
Yeah, you could be an unfinished creation in this world, and isn't that potentially worse? Yeah, there we go. We'll go with that.
It seems as though that would have worked better if they brought that potential up in a line of dialogue, though, or something, doesn't it? You know, which I don't think they do. Although next time I rewatch it, I'll look for that. But
yeah, maybe it reminds me as well of no, I've mentioned Ghosts on here before. It reminds me of a very good joke in Ghosts early on where they're trying to scare them out of the house, and they just introduce this little girl character who you never see again, who died during the plague, and she just stands there going, "Ring a roses," and all the ghosts are really freaked out. And then she just goes, "I don't know, people just seem to find it really creepy."
That's really good. Well, I think we'll leave that episode there then, John. Unless you've got anything else to add.
I don't think I do. I think we've ticked off all of my Matt Damon, Lorem Ipsum dollar. That was it. That's all I wanted to mention.
Those two things.
Yeah, that was it.
The two most important cultural things of our age. Great. Well, we won't do any rankings yet. We'll leave that till later in the series and indeed in this podcast. But thanks, John, and join you again for the next episode.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.